So this is a short video on how to use Premiere Pro to import frames that you've rendered out in Maya into Premiere and then export them as a movie file. And what we're specifically interested in here is how to get your animation out of Maya and into a usable format. So here's a scene that I've animated. It's just a little yellow beetle driving along in a cartoon land environment. And what I want to do is to render out these frames. So if I do a test render here using Arnold, you can see that I've got a reasonably attractive lighting setup. This is using Arnold's physical sky setup. And this is a single frame. Now this will take a while. This took me about 45 seconds to render. But what we need to do is render a whole bunch of them. So I'll just recap very briefly the batch render settings, or rather actually not batch render, because we can't batch render in Maya in Arnold without creating a watermark. So what you have to do is under File Output select JPEG. I've got quality at 100, but you can take that down. Under frame/animation ext select name.hashtag.ext, leave frame padding at 4 and then choose the frame range. In this case I've just rendered 25 frames, 1 to 25. Under renderable cameras select shot camera. Under image size I've picked one of the HD options. Usually we're rendering HD. HD is the 16:9 standard aspect ratio, so this is a relatively low version of it, a low poly version of it, quarter HD, but it still renders 16:9 aspect ratio. And then click close, and then what you have to do is get out of the animation or modeling menu, whatever you're in. I'm in the modeling menu right now. Go to rendering, and then you want to go to render, and instead of selecting batch render you want to select render sequence, and make sure your shot is set correctly, your project is set correctly, and Maya will then render to your images folder, and that's where you will find your rendered images. So here are my rendered images. You can see I'm in My Documents, Maya Projects Beetle. That's the project folder. And you can see I've got 25 images here. And if I open them up, if I double click on that, it will pull up a rendered image. You can see there's actually some problems here. Unlike Mental Ray, Arnold gives us a black horizon when you use their physical sun and sky settings, which is slightly annoying, and it means that I'd need to make this perfect. I'd need to go back into Maya and adjust the vertices in these hills so that you can't see the black horizon, because obviously in real life there are no black horizons. So this will still need some tweaking, but it's good enough for what we're doing today. So now that we've done that, we've got to open a new piece of software, and that is Premiere Pro. So I find Premiere Pro, double click on it and open it up, and it will take a while to load. So then once it's loaded, I want to click on New Project, and then it will pull up this window, and we want to name it. So I'm going to call it Beetle Beetle Test, and I'm going to give it today's date. I always like to name stuff. It's the 18th of October 2019. It's actually my birthday, so be sure to wish me a happy birthday. Browse, make sure you know where it's all going to go. So it's going to go into Documents, Adobe Premiere Pro 13.0. That's fine. And then click on that, and that should open up the project. So we'll just have to wait a little bit. And there's our project folder. So now we want to get our media into the project, but before we do anything we need to do something. We need to go to our preferences. That's Edit Preferences General. Edit Preferences General. That's going to pull up a window. What we want is, I think it's Timeline. Yeah, okay, so what you've got to make sure is that this button here, or this window here, Still Image Default Duration is set to 1 frame. By default it's set to 24 frames, but what that will do is give you each individual image. Each single frame will be treated by Premiere as if it's 24 frames long, i.e. 1 second, which is not what we want at all. So that needs to be set to 1. So make sure that's set to 1 and then click OK. And then once we've done that, we're going to go and find our images. So let's go to File, Import, and now we've got to navigate to our Maya folder. And mine has already popped up, but that's because I did this earlier. you will have to navigate to My Documents, Maya, Projects, Beetle, Images. It's your images folder that we want. So select the first image, then click on Image Sequence, and Maya should now import all of the images into Premiere. So if I click Open, it's imported them all in there. Now if I run my mouse over these images, it should come in as an image sequence. So that's really good. That's all good so far. So what I want to do now is drag and drop that into the timeline, and that should automatically now pop into my timeline. And let's see, is that going to work? What's happening here? So maybe still waiting. So I'm just going to wait a minute for this to great, so everything seems to be working fine. If I press play up here, the shot is playing, and you can see I've got all the frames loaded up down here in the timeline. And so that's the length of the shot. It's only 25 frames because it's only 1 second. So if I press play 1000, that's all I've got because that's all I rendered. This is just a test. So there we go, and you can fiddle around down here to make sure that you can see the whole thing in your timeline down here. And you can also add audio. Premiere Pro will give you multiple audio channels, so you can bring in music, sound effects, dialogue, whatever you want. And once we're happy with it, we can then go ahead and export it. So if I go File, Export, Media, now I can export this as a movie file to my desktop. Now typically you want to select, the most popular codec these days is A264. There are a whole bunch of presets to fiddle with in Premiere, but we're just going to pick the simple one. And then you want to look at the output. Now in this case my output is going to my desktop, which is fine. I'm happy with that. So then the next thing to do is click Export. And it's going to replace one I made earlier on, and I'm going to click Yes. And that should have done it. So let's go and have a look. So if I go to my desktop, there it is. I'm going to open it up with, if I can just right click this thing, and I'm going to open this up with VLC, which is fine. Let's just make that a sensible size. And there we go. We've got our VLC player there. So now it's going to play the video. And again, you know, you can see that there are some problems with this render, which I would need to fix. But basically, we've now got a movie file created from our rendered images. And there's also a blog post that goes with this that should help recap these steps. So if you go to the Animation Printers blog, there it is. There's the blog post, Friday 18th of October, Adobe Premiere Pro Basics for Animators, which basically recaps the steps that I've just explained here. So I hope that's helpful. This video, there are many other videos that you can watch to help with this. Probably one of the most important other ones is how to batch render this series of frames. And actually, if you go here to the blog and search for batch render, it will explain to you how to do a batch render in Maya. But that is a 2015 blog post, and it's about mental ray. So you'd have to be aware that although most of these settings are the same, it is a little bit different because of the different settings in Arnold. So I actually need to update this blog post for Arnold.